welcome to the Transformational Podcast, a conversation between brothers about practical ways faith is impacting our lives. We invite you to join us on this journey as we are learning to let faith transform the way we live. We are glad you are with us today and look forward to sharing our journey with you. Now let's jump in.
All right, welcome to the Transformational Podcast. We're so glad you're here this morning with us. Man, what a week it's been. I'm Chris. The other guy on the podcast right here is my brother Robert.
That's right. Good morning.
You know what? I was thinking about this as I was just doing this intro. A lot of people don't really know, maybe if they're new to the podcast, don't know that I live in Texas. You live in Maryland. You know, I'm a pastor.
Yeah, I didn't think about
Grace
that.
Fellowship. Yeah. And you're a colonel in the Marine Corps. And so we started this podcast almost a year ago, just really wanting to talk about how our faith has transformed the way we live, that it's not about a vocation. It's about, our just relationship with Jesus and how it should change every part of our life. So that's really what the heart of this podcast is all about. And so we just each time want to talk through what God's doing in our lives. And as we do our daily reading, both of us try to read scripture each day and allow it to show us something about God, something about ourselves, and how that should impact the way we live. So that's really the heart of this. And I hope that as you join the journey with us, that God will speak to you through what he's teaching us. And so that's the heart. So Robert, it's been a crazy week. Tell me, your week's been really crazy. Mine's actually been a little more chill than yours.
Yeah, I didn't. It's one of those things where I know we try to link up several times this week to do the podcast at night. We do this normally after hours. For those who think I couldn't work to do this, I'm not.
Robert likes to do it not at night so he can show off the Washington Monument behind his shoulder out the window.
Now we catch me at my house down in Southern Maryland in the morning on a Saturday, which I enjoy doing this too because it's an opportunity to kind of catch up from the week. This week, Chris, was the job I'm currently doing is I hate to say it, it's like a 10 to 12 hour job. That's what it does each day. And nothing less than 10. I think that would be weird. Actually, I got out one day. I was like, whoa, I got off early. It was like 11-hour day. And but this week, yeah, I know, which seems ridiculous. This week was pretty exceptional. I think I was doing 12 to 14-hour days every day, starting on Monday.
Nice.
And it was pretty crazy. We were, as a organization, assigned an event that we were working on. It's not important for the purpose of the podcast, but we were traveling to it on Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, we were not traveling to it. And then Tuesday morning, we were traveling to it. And then by Wednesday afternoon, we were no longer traveling to it. It was a change cycle of every 6 to 12 hours. And so what that creates is a lot of...
Everyday red light, green light is what you did. It's the professional version.
It is the professional version. I like that, Chris. I'm going to use that. I'm not even giving credit for everybody who listens.
That's fine.
You can just know that it came from him. But yeah, you're not getting credit. Yeah, we were playing professional red light, green light. And but what that really means is like doing everything as many times as you just heard. So it's pretty crazy. I did, you opened the podcast talking about the why we started the podcast, and it's been really neat this week as life has been exceptionally busy. I've had opportunities where God kind of pops in and he's like, kind of like just reminding me like, hey, I'm still in charge. I'm not surprised. There's nothing about this red light, green light week that I didn't know was coming. And he's been using, we call it, our key verse is Romans 12, 1-2. But the part that I really like is but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will. And, part of that testing and the rest is he gives us wisdom for the moment with which we're in. He gives us direction for the time of which he's placed us. And so I've definitely seen that a lot this week in my own job. Just as a by way of announcement before we jump over into your, because you were on vacation, so I definitely want to hear about it. it was announced within the last few weeks that I was selected to be the program manager for PMA 275. And so
Okay,
I'll be
time
doing that
out.
sometime.
Wait, I need you to put that in. I need you to put that in civilian terms, please.
Yeah, so PMA 275. All of our program offices, we have like a 3-letter beginning identifier. They have some form of significance that I've never even bothered to learn. It doesn't matter to me.
It's
Then
kind
we
of
assign
like
a number to
a
them.
it's kind of like a license plate. That's what I feel like you were describing there for a second.
Yeah,
So
it's like a license
letters and
plate, just like
numbers.
one maybe. Yeah,
All right, go ahead.
but
So
the reality is it's the joint program office for the V-22. So the tilt rotor aircraft. It's kind of in the news right now. It definitely has some current challenges. It's got an amazing team running it, a great team pulling it together. I have come from that team before in the past. Of a lot of them saying, "Hey, we're looking forward to working with them again." I'm working forward to working with them again. And so that doesn't happen until the spring, but as you could say, my fate has been sealed. Once I take that, I owe another 4 years. So
there you
my
go.
1 year from getting out, my 1 year from getting out continues to be another 1 year from getting out. But I'm kind of summing up, Chris. I'm summing up like 2 weeks, but a lot of crazy God stuff that's happened over the last 2 weeks. And it's funny. It
Yeah.
wasn't until this morning when I was sitting on the front porch. Because when you have a week like that, if you don't actually sit and soak in the Lord's word towards the end of it, you can probably find yourself a little run down. And
Yeah.
just kind of sitting there and
Hey,
reflecting on the week was definitely helpful this morning.
yeah. Were you sitting on the front porch staring down the road? Sorry, that's a little country song there.
Oh yeah,
Well,
no,
that's
I got
cool,
you. What
dude.
are you
I
doing
mean,
on yours, man?
and well, you say, 1 more year from getting out. The reality is that I don't know that you felt like you were getting out in a year anyway. You really feel like God's got you in a
Yeah.
place to continue to carry influence. I only say that because, man, I think there's a lot of people in different jobs. You're not in there in that job wherever you are to earn a paycheck or climb the ladder. You're there to make a
Mm.
difference and to be a light.
Mm-hmm.
And man, I think it's funny because what we're going to look at today here in a minute is it's just a reminder that God's the one who promotes. It may look
Yeah.
like illusion,
No
maybe
joke about
people,
it.
but God's the
Yeah.
one who promotes. And so,
Yeah, before we jump into
anyway,
that though, because I do want to jump into it. I'm like raring to go, but
yeah,
let's hold on just 2 seconds. What did
yeah.
you do on vacation?
Okay, so vacation I was thinking about as you were talking was actually 2 weeks ago. This past week was basically catch up from vacation, and actually I've been spending a lot of time studying and preparing for. We got a lot of stuff coming up in the fall, so a lot of content stuff each day. But um, coming off of vacation was awesome because we went on a family road trip, drove up to Kentucky to see the Ark encounter,
All right,
where's
very
the
cool.
full size Ark. And Robert, I'm just telling you, I was surprised how good a shape it's in. Noah did a really good job. I was surprised it lasted this long.
Yeah, I know they dug it up and just stuck it right there on the ground.
It's amazing. And hey, look, I didn't know they would have so many iron or so much iron work in it as well. I mean, there's nails and
Yeah,
things like that. It's amazing. Now,
modern
if you're
amenities they had.
unaware, yes. And they had a restroom on the third deck. It was crazy. Anyway, air
Too funny.
conditioned. I used to think it was
Oh my
a tough
gosh,
experience, but the air conditioner was nice. Anyway,
sign me
um,
up.
yeah, no, all seriousness, if you're not aware, some people felt um, God lead them to build the ark to what we believe, what we get from Scripture as far as the size and what people have studied to figure out what it would look like and how they would operate, and it is quite amazing. It was quite an encounter, if you will. Um, and if you choose to go to it, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's probably easiest to fly into uh, Ohio, Cincinnati. That's probably the biggest city there. There's others that you can fly in, but it's not that far from Cincinnati, maybe 45-minute drive south. And
Cool.
it's in the middle of nowhere, but you'll need an entire day to go through it. It's quite interesting. Lots of now, I will say it is lots of reading, so get your read on. But then we also spent half a day, or we stayed there till a little after lunch, and then went up to the Creation Museum, which is
Okay. I don't know that I've even heard of that.
It's I forgot what town it's in. Once again, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's pretty close to Cincinnati, so it's closer to it's pretty close to Ohio. We actually drove from there and took a little 15-minute drive so that we could drive through Indiana and Ohio to add that to our road trip states because we're right there at the corner is where it is. Nice. And so we hit those two up. And that was really cool. I would say I wish I had more time at the Creation Museum and I hadn't been at the Ark all day because, man, I was tired. My eyes were tired. My brain was tired. But it is fascinating, Robert. Like the people who have heard that, well, the Bible and science are in conflict. That is a bunch of hooey that we have been fed. And actually, what you'll begin to discover is that the reason that science itself doesn't talk more about creation and about what they've discovered is because it really points toward creation, towards proof of creation, but out of a bias of not wanting to acknowledge God, they refuse to talk about it. They refuse to show what science has uncovered in the world of how to age the earth, the carbon dating, all this kind of stuff. What I love here is it's not fairy tale explanations. It is scientific explanations of why this is significant and why this is scientifically accurate. The statement that I kind of hold on to is that the Bible's is not a history book. It's not a science book, but in every place in history and science books that when the Bible talks about history or talks about science, it's affirmed through those, or it has been confirmed in those areas. And so it's been fascinating, and I would just encourage anyone who's ever struggled with that. Unfortunately, man, there's probably the generation after us, man, they got pushed really heavy, that science is in conflict with of Scripture, and man, I think if you do some digging, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think of course I enjoy that stuff. So, but I think the big takeaway, because we enjoy it, or at least I enjoy it. The big thing is if you don't enjoy it, I wouldn't hold on to your personal, whatever you've been fed just out of ad hoc. Like, I'm just going to hold on to it because I don't enjoy it. I'm not interested in looking it up, and so I'm just not going to look, and I'm just going to hold on to whatever it is that I have. I don't think that's wise. There's plenty of PhD level folks who've done both sides of the study there, and I think that's important.
Yep. And I would say go ahead. Go to the Creation Museum. So at least it's illustrated for you. You get pictures with it at that point. So, and I thought I found it incredibly.
Is it written in crayon for you, Chris?
Some
watercolors.
Sections,
you enjoyed that?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right.
And yeah, it was awesome. But we just hit some stops along the way. Went to the Louisville Slugger Museum. Cool. Factory, got to see the way they make bats, and that was, I find that stuff cool. The boys found it was awesome. Got to watch them make wooden bats, and so that was cool. And then
was that hard to Kentucky.
Watch? Why is that?
Because they're so hard.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, it was hardwood, so it was very hard.
Okay,
Robert, anyway. I'm proud of you. I'm so proud.
I do my best.
You caught me off guard. Oh man, that's good. That's
okay,
good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we also stopped by the Kentucky Derby,
Oh, that's
museum,
very
or
bougie of you.
well, it was it kind of is, but behind the scenes it was really cool.
Yeah,
It
I'm
was
sure.
used to not
Yeah,
be a
for
bougie
sure.
thing, but now it is.
Yeah.
And then we went to Nashville, and I came back with Stashville over here. So
Yeah.
Stashville from
Oh, I
Nashville.
saw it.
Um, yeah,
1970s called and they want their mustache back.
Hey,
Oh,
listen, call
hey,
the
MacGyver.
1970s and let them know I'm bringing it back.
Oh my goodness. Oh, we've got to
Oh,
get going into this. We got to get going. We
oh,
got to
I
get
know.
going.
This is a little
Let's jump
fun.
into what we were talking about. This is too much
Okay,
fun.
so Robert, here's
We've clearly not been talking in a couple of weeks, so
yeah. So
we're a little more
here's
timely than
what we
normal.
want to talk about. It is something that jumped out at me in our time of reading, and the book of Esther. Okay. Um,
Okay.
Now, it is a great story about Queen Esther and how God used her to essentially save a nation, save the Jewish people,
Mm-hmm.
and through her courageous, her willingness to step out in courage and take big risk. Okay. Um, Now, here's what I found interesting, though. You get to the end of the book of Esther.
Okay.
And the end of the book of Esther doesn't mention Esther's name one time. Esther chapter 10, let me
Okay.
read it. Okay.
I'm with
It
you.
says King Xerxes imposed a tribute throughout his empire, even to the distant coastlands. His great achievements and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Media and Persia. Mordecai the Jew became the prime minister with authority next to that of Xerxes himself. He was very great among the Jews, who held him in high esteem because he continued to work for the good of his people and to speak up for the welfare of all their descendants. This is why it stood out to me. Um, Mordecai seems to be a the B character, right? In this deal,
Yeah.
he's
He's a
playing
little bit of
the
the supporting role. The book's
yeah.
called
That's what
Esther,
it
but he's in there,
yeah. But yet the last chapter, in essence, gives a tribute to Mordecai. I
which
found
is
that
interesting.
fascinating.
That's
So
yeah.
it just makes me just take a step back and go, okay. So what is his role? What can I learn about why at the end of a book called Esther does do
Yeah.
they is it a tribute to the supporting role rather than to Esther? It doesn't tell us what beyond what happened to Esther beyond that moment, but it tells us about Mordecai. So what can we learn
Well, it
from it,
is
and why is it
fascinating.
that way?
Yeah, I was going to say it is fascinating because Mordecai is essentially in Esther 2, verse 5. It kind of gives us the relationship between him and Esther. And frankly, had Mordecai not been, at least it feels like the way the book's written, had Mordecai not been in the picture, Esther may not have stepped in the way she did. Now, God was clearly working in the situation, and of course, he arranges it all. But it's fascinating that he arranges Mordecai, who is, we learned in chapter 2, verse 5, that Mordecai, actually it's verse 7, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he brought up because she had neither father nor mother. So she was an orphan and he was raising her. The girl who was also named as Esther, now she was named as Esther and Hadassah because she had a Jewish name, which is Hadassah, but because they lived where they lived, she also had like kind of a local name. It was a way for them to blend in exile. In other words, not call attention to themselves. And so they had, and a lot of them had this kind of thing. And sometimes it's just given to them. That's just the way it was. Anyway,
Right.
this girl was named Esther, who was lovely in form and features. Mordecai had taken care of her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So in other words, when family died, he adopted Esther. So this whole book,
So
Esther,
real
enter
real quick,
Mordecai.
The Hadassah was the Hebrew name that meant myrtle, and Esther is the Persian name that meant star. So there's the two name thing for you. So.
Okay. So yeah, enter Mordecai, and he's taking care of her, and you're kind of at this point, right? The book's still named Esther, and the way I read it, I'm thinking, okay, so we learn about Mordecai because we're setting up Esther, right? And we need to know about Esther. Now, what's interesting is we go forward a little bit further, and as we were talking about this, verse 19, um, there was essentially a conspiracy to cover the king. During that time, it's verse 21, sorry, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So he's a gate guard. Probably not the bottom, but definitely not the top.
Yeah,
where he's at.
The Jews were still in captivity. They held the places of everyday servants, whatever they were told to do by the Persian government.
Yeah. I mean, and like he's not the inner gate guard, right? He's like the outer gate guard, which means he's
not close to the king.
Yeah, he's the first one. He's the first one to go in a fight.
Yes.
Anyway, he's sitting there at the gate, and Big Thena, which I love that name, Big Thena. Anyway, that's not how it's pronounced, I'm sure, but it makes it sound funnier. And Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate the King Xerses. Now they're actually guarding the doorway to the king, not the gate. So they're like outside talking next to Mordecai outside the gate because you can't have the conversation of, hey, I think we should kill this guy outside his door, right? I think that would be that's probably not the right place to have that conversation.
Probably not going to be very successful.
Yeah, well, it turns out they're having it outside, and while Mordecai is out there, and he listens to what goes on, he actually ends up telling Esther. Now, at this point in the story, Esther has become queen, and we do skip a lot of Esther's story because that's not really the lens through which we're reading at the moment. We're reading it through Mordecai's lens. He tells Esther. Yeah. Esther tells the king. They discover, hey, he was right, and they end up hanging the two officials who were trying to assassinate the King Xerses. And so God uses, what's fascinating, Chris, is God uses a very unique situation where he's just sitting at the gate to elevate Mordecai in the eyes of the king. And Mordecai, honestly, he could have just ignored it. I mean, what's it to him if the king is assassinated? Like, who cares?
Right.
He's a Jew. This is the king of, king of, what's this, Persia? Like, I feel bad that I don't know. What is it? He was the king of what?
Xerxes? Persia?
Xerxes,
he's the Persian.
Yeah, Persia. Sorry, Persia Media. Sorry. My brain blanked. So who cares? These are the folks who are keeping them in captivity, more or less. They're exiled here. And so, but Mordecai, being the man of God he is, he's like, no, I can't stand by and let evil do evil, right? He's like, I'm going to have to tell Queen. Queen tells the king, or at least the officials. They do some investigation, and sure enough, not the gate guards, but the door guards, the one who actually could have killed King Xerxes, they were actually conspiring. And so they hung him because that's obviously not allowed at that time.
Yeah. He does what is right. He doesn't just go, well, it's not my business. I'm just in this role. He does the right thing, regardless of whether it would benefit him or not. I mean, at this point, there's no guarantee of any kind of benefit. But he goes, no, I have to do the right thing. It's never the wrong time to do the right thing. All right. There's never a wrong time to do the right thing. And I think about that. I think often when we feel as if, man, that's the right thing to do, but maybe somebody will do it. Well, maybe that somebody's you.
Maybe the Lord actually ordained you for that moment.
Yeah, for that moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to keep moving because I think the setup to your chapter 10 is part of the whole kind of that lens. And I actually
Yeah.
am probably more than I should enjoying reading this through the lens of Mordecai, because the
Yeah.
book's always kind of been read through the lens of Esther. So anyway, we move on, and this guy named Haman, who happens to be a really really bad dude, gets elevated to the one of the highest seats of honor, which is interesting how many times that sometimes can happen. And we always think like this time in history doesn't matter from here to the beginning, like this is the only time or the first time, but as we see here, it's quite common. And one of the things that this guy liked to do is he liked to walk around and make people kneel down and pay honor to him because he felt like he was godlike. And while everyone else would do that, Haman or Mordecai in this point, he wouldn't do that. Now, this feels a juxtaposition. In other words, this feels in controversy or in conflict with what just happened, because he took care of King Xerxes when he was going to be
Right.
assassinated, but he wouldn't pay honor as required or desired by this very high official. And so then you have to ask yourself, well, what's Mordecai's game here? Like, where is the conflict, right?
Yeah.
And Chris, you
Now,
correct me if I'm
Robert,
wrong. Go ahead.
this is actually something that I found interesting is that Haman, we find out he was an Agagite, which is a
Oh,
descendant of
yeah, actually,
Agag,
yeah, bring that out.
and
Yep.
who was king of the Amalekites. Okay, the Amalekites were ancient enemies of Israel, and so his hatred,
Mm-hmm.
it was front loaded because of racism. Let's call it what it was. This is a picture of racism where he hated them already, and so he's trying to
Mm.
dominate them and really satisfy his own personal desire of going, no, you bow down to me. Well,
Yep.
as Jews, they said, listen, we will honor those in authority, but we will only bow to our God. And that's
Yes.
that's what we saw with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when we talked about that a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
It's
I
that,
know.
listen, we're going to honor those in authority because God tells us to.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Haman did, but we won't violate what God has told us is right. We will honor up to
Yes.
the line of sin and of not honoring God. God comes first, and this was
Yeah.
one of you know and I can't help but think that Haman knew that because he hated the Jews, and so part of this was him trying to get them to violate their commitment to God of trying to make them bow to Him. Now, it doesn't say that. This is my own,
Well, and
taking my
Chris,
own liberty here.
yeah. Yeah, so the part of that is that it may be that he was not just knew their thing, but sometimes because if you have a hatred of someone, you have a hatred of their religion, and so you want them to do things that you know will violate their religion. In other words,
Right.
you don't want them to tolerate or celebrate. You want them to participate, and a lot of times, even as Christ followers, we find ourselves in these positions where folks don't want us to just tolerate it. In other words, we're just not going to do anything about it. They then kind of want us to celebrate it. They want us to yay, to promote it. And then before we know it, they're actually asking us to participate, and they want us to do that because they despise our beliefs. They despise, actually, frankly, they just despise God. And so what they're trying to do is, and it's not, let's be real, Chris, it's not them at work, because we talk about that transformation, that renewing of our mind. It's because they don't know Christ and therefore don't have a renewal of the mind, couldn't have a renewal of the mind. And all they're doing is they're being led and they're following what Jesus would say is Satan, their father. And so that kind of that flesh thing, the things that we're saved from, frankly, the things that we still fight with. So I don't really ever in those situations, I love the person and I understand what kind of where they're coming from, but I don't, in my heart, my heart goes out to them because I recognize that what they're trying to push me to do, it's because they don't know Jesus. And
Yeah.
that's for
Yeah.
me, that's something that I'd love them to kind of come in that concert. But anyway, do you have any other thoughts before we keep moving?
No, just you see this picture of him going, man, I want you to bow down, and Haman is willing to honor but not willing to disobey God. And so it makes Haman incredibly mad, right? And he wants to not only destroy Mordecai, but he goes, I know how to really get Mordecai. I'll just destroy all the Jews. And so um, he if you find I found this interesting. If it please the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed, talking about the Jews, and I will give 10,000 large sacks of silver to the government administration to be deposited in the royal treasury. He's not. It's
Mm-hmm.
not. He's going. Listen, can I bribe you? Right. I mean, that's what it sure seems like. Let me make a
Yeah.
donation based on what I want you to do. Can I tell you that often happens in the church? And I'm not going to get off on that, but people are like going, "Hey, I'll give back to God as long as you do what I want you to do."
Yeah.
As a church, right? Which I'm just going. That's
Oh
not
no.
giving back to God. That's you believing that you are God because you're wanting to direct the way in which uh, those funds are being used. And anyway, I know it's not a direct correlation here, but you see a a, uh, a trend of listen.
Yeah.
This is somebody who's saying, "Man, I can buy." I can pay you to do the evil I want you to do, or the thing that I want you to do. And anyway, I know it's not direct, but it made me think of those two things. But he's not doing it for the good of the kingdom, or he
Yeah.
wouldn't have to pay
Yeah. Yeah.
10,000 large sacks of silver. He doesn't have the what's best of the kingdom in mind. He only has his uh, he only has his best interests in mind.
Yeah. I know. And then, so as we move forward with the story of Esther, which happens to be through the lens of Mordecai at the moment, Haman gets really mad at the fact that Mordecai won't bow down, as often happens, right? And he
Yep.
decides that we are going to annihilate not just Haman, we're going to annihilate all of the Jews. And so he sets up a kind of a plot to not just kill Haman, but kill Mordecai, but kill Mordecai and all the Jews with him. And that actually gets signed into law. And
Mm-hmm.
when Mordecai learns of this, he tells Esther, hey, this is what's going on. And what's interesting, Chris, is Esther kind of comes back to him over in chapter 4, verse, I want to say it's verse 11, says, all the king's official and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman, because by the way, I'm going to pause here for a second. Mordecai says to Esther, like, hey, you need to go tell the king that that Haman is going to try to kill all the Jews. And hey, by the way, Esther, like, you're a Jew, so you should be helping us out here. So she comes back and says, hey, all the people of the rural provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner courtyard without being summoned, the king has but one law, that that they be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. So what Esther's saying is, I haven't seen the king in over 30 days. And if I walk in there, he's going to kill me. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
the king. I can't go to the king. It'll just end in my death.
Yeah.
Well, so Mordecai, go ahead.
Well, his response, I think, is fantastic. He says in verse 13,
Yeah.
don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you'll escape when all the other Jews are killed. He's saying, and
Mm-hmm.
then he says, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance. Oh, I love this. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this? Man, that is like that's the key verse for this story, right? I mean, for
It
such a
is.
time as
Yeah.
this. And I love it too because this is Mordecai's wisdom and his influence. He's not saying he's not trying to leverage his influence to say, all right, Esther, you've got to figure out how to get me in there to the king. I mean, I've helped save his life once. Like, no, he's saying, God has put you in this place, and I'd simply want to help give you wisdom and help guide you. But don't think for a moment that you're
Mm.
not won't be effective if you don't step up and speak up. You've got to speak up, and if you don't, it's not that the deliverance won't come. It's not that rescue won't
I
come.
know, right?
It's that God will
Yeah.
use someone else to do it, and you'll be
Man, I tell
destroyed
you
in the
what,
process.
I've told this story before, and I'll make it really quick. But there was a time when God was like, hey, I want you to do something. I ignored him. And while I'm watching, God made that happen through someone else. And God said, I can do it without you. I'm just
Yeah.
inviting you. I'm inviting you to join me. And in this case,
Yeah.
it's fascinating because Mordecai, he's not beating her down like, hey, you idiot, like you need to be, this is like the only reason you're there, blah, 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 blah. No, he's actually calling her up right now. He is very wisely giving her the reminder that like, you won't escape it. Like if you don't do something, you're not going to escape it. Don't think that you can just hide and not do anything. You won't escape it. But what that is that's his wisdom pouring in to somebody he's raised, and frankly. And
Yeah.
I love Esther's response for such a time as this, because, I've used that. That's like, I want to come back to the first such time as this, but I love Esther's response because I think it gives you a very clean insight into what she was actually thinking when she came back and said, okay, I'll do it. She said, when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I die, I die.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I don't think
and
she thought
she
she was going to make it out of it alive, to be honest.
no, but she calls for what is it? She calls for him to go gather the Jews
Yes.
and say, "Hey, have them fast and pray for me."
Yes.
She understood
Mm-hmm.
where her power and her protection came from.
She
Um,
did, absolutely. And just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even if the Lord doesn't rescue us, we still won't bow down to you.
that's right.
Which is another one of my favorite. I mean, if you're going to be obstinate serving the Lord, right? Like
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you're going to push back in service to the Lord because you just love Him more.
So, for the
Um,
sake of time, Robert, I'm going to try to do a little summary to get us moving forward a little faster. But Esther,
well, can we do one more?
the,
Because
yeah,
can we
sure,
do
sure,
one
sure.
more? Just the one that, because this is my last favorite part of this book, and it's
Okay, go for
basically
it.
this part where the king is reading a history book because he can't fall asleep. So he's like, "Hey, read me the history book." So that's kind of helping him, like your friend who
Well, hold
falls
on.
asleep
I'm
to
going to
our
set that.
podcast.
There it is. There you are. There you are,
Yeah,
Jack. Hey,
yeah,
real
yeah, yeah.
quick. So just let me get the groundwork. So from there, from what Mordecai told Esther to do, she decides, all right, I'm going to
Okay.
put together a banquet, and I'm going to go to the king and ask if he would come to a banquet that I throw for him. And he extends the scepter, and then she says, "Come to my banquet." He says, "Sure." All right. And then it talks about that Haman was uh, they had the first banquet, and she says, "Hey, I want to have a second banquet. I want you to come to it." Um, and so he says, "Sure, okay." So it says that Haman was happy when he left, but then he saw
Mm-hmm.
Mordecai, and it made him mad again, because he was not
Yep.
standing or trembling nervously before him, and so Haman created a plot to kill Mordecai. And that this is where we're picking up with what you're talking about. So the king can't sleep one
Okay.
night. He orders the book to be brought of history be
Mm-hmm.
brought to him, and he records or discovers, not records. He reads the record of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, who were wanting to kill or assassinate King Xerxes. And so that's when the king goes, "Hey, we never did anything for him, did we?" And they said, "No." And so he brings in, this is so funny, Haman, and says, "Haman, if the king wanted
Yeah.
to
Right.
really like honor someone, what would he do?" Well, he said, "You'll give him a robe that's one of the king's robes, and have him ride on a horse
Mm-hmm.
that has the insignia of the king on it, and royal emblem on its head, and just he'll get to dress in the king's royal attire, and then you'd have an official lead him through the streets." Which, Robert, I'm just going to tell you, this wouldn't this be the most awkward thing ever? You're riding on a horse, and there's somebody leading the horse through the streets, yelling, "This is what the king does for those he wishes to honor." Like that would be,
Yeah.
I don't know, dude. That
So
would be
awkward. So
awkward
awkward.
taco, dude. I'm like, no thanks. But
It doesn't matter if
so
you're
the
on the horse or leading the horse. It's awkward.
no, yes. And so the king goes, "Excellent. That's what I want you to do for Mordecai. And I want you to lead him through the streets." And so Haman has
Whew.
to lead him through the streets. and yelled this about the very one he wanted to kill. And so by the time he was done with that, um, Haman felt humiliated, and
Yeah, and actually, it's funny. And then we're going to jump into the kind of the part that really made us kind of stick here is when Haman gets done with this whole thing. He's so apoplectic. He's so distraught. He's so just down, and he's talking to his family about what's happened. His family are like, "Hey, dude, like you're going to need to back off because everything you're doing right now is got you in a bad way. It's going to lead to destruction.
yeah,
The Lord is clearly for Haman." And as they're telling him this, he gets called basically to the second banquet that ends in his basically his destruction. It is what ends up
yeah.
having him killed. But I don't think that's the point. The thing that I know that we talked about, getting back to Esther 10, right?
Hey,
Go ahead.
verse 13 sums up what you just said. They say, "You will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him."
Mm,
there's your foreshadowing, right? It's like dun
yep.
dun dun. Right. All right. So go ahead.
Right. Yeah, and it's fatal to oppose him because the Lord is on his side, right? And so that
Right.
we as Christ followers can understand that we're victorious in this life and the next. It's that
Yeah.
simple. And when not in this life, definitely in the next. uh,
Yes.
but anyway, we get to Esther 10, and I think that what we realize is that the book about Esther with the, I don't know, we call it, would you call him the B-roll character, Mordecai?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it actually turns out to be a book about Esther with a wise advisor or wise person, somebody God who's actually, you know, Mordecai said, "For such a time as this" to Esther, but I would offer that it was as much a "for such a time as this" for Mordecai, the person who gave
Yeah.
her advice or gave her, counseling or, kind of encouraged her to do the right thing. Had he not been there, it would have been very different. And I think we were talking about earlier is sometimes you don't have to be in leadership to have influence. You don't
That's right.
have to be numero uno to be able um, to operate within your sphere of influence. And frankly, Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you. I don't think that anybody is in a situation that isn't for such a time as this. I
For
think
real.
that's the
Yeah.
reason why God calls us to work with him. It is for such a time as this. It's exactly where you are, exactly what
Yeah.
you're doing. And I don't care what you're doing. It is for such a
Yeah.
time as that. That's what he's doing. He may be having you in training like he did with Joseph, with through Potiphar's house and through that, those times as he was waiting to be like number two in Egypt. It may be David out in the wilderness, kind of waiting to be king over Israel. But it is for such a time as this. He's arranging it. We can see this very clearly in Mordecai's life that he arranges these. I mean, they seem at the time, I'm sure Mordecai was like, this is really weird, very awkward. That's strange. Not realizing that God was putting all these little building blocks in places because he was using him for such a time as that. And I think sometimes I think I don't know, we get dug into the details of life. Me, like me, 12 to 14-hour days, and you can miss really quickly that God may be working something that you're not aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few things that just stand out when I'm thinking about Mordecai that we can learn from him. One is that God is the
Yeah.
one who fights for you. Never once did he turn and
Mm,
try to fight his own enemy. He wasn't called to
absolutely.
fight that enemy. He was called to honor God and trust him, and God fought his battle for him. God protects you. He didn't know the plot against him, but God did, and God took care of it. He wasn't
Absolutely.
worried. He wasn't concerned. He wasn't anxious. He just continued to remain faithful to God. Also, that you don't need, and you just hinted at this, you don't need positional authority. You need relational influence to make a difference. That's what
Mm,
really leadership is. It's not about your positional authority, it's about your relational influence. And so, how did he gain that? He gained that by fighting for the good of other people. That's what it says at the end. It's why they loved him. The end of verse 10, it says the Jews held him in high esteem because he continued to work for the good of his people and to speak up for the welfare of all their descendants. He didn't forget where he came from and that God's the one who promoted him. And so he continued to fight for the good of others. And as he did what God told him to do, and he just honored people, man, God promoted him, God protected him, God fought for him, and he made a great impact simply because he said, man, I'm here for such a time as this. And it made an impact.
Amen.
Thank you for taking time to join us today. Our prayer is that you are encouraged in your own journey as you let faith transform the way you live. If you enjoyed hanging with us today, let us know by leaving us a 5-star review and sharing our podcast with others. We look forward to discussing what God is doing in our lives in our next episode.